Okay, guess we will begin. Good morning and welcome to another breakfast talk of the Brooklyn Waterfront Research Center. Today we have a lot of people registered for this event, and we hope many of them will show up. It's a interesting topic, and the speakers are going to be quite interesting and informative, and teach many of us a lot about one of the activities that many of us might not be so aware of is going on along the Brooklyn waterfront. We think of it perhaps as a Manhattan-centric activity, but here we go. Brooklyn is on the move again. We're lucky to have 4 speakers with us today, and I'll introduce them in the order in which they will speak. Actually, 2 are City Tech colleagues, which I'm pleased about. And we have Winnette Clyde. Winnette Clyde she's the collections management librarian at our library, at City Tech's library. Her research explores intersection of Black history and fashion history, drawing out undercredited African-American contributors, their critical innovations and accomplishments. And we're going to see some interesting photos and learn some interesting facts about Fulton Street, and as among other places and things, but Fulton Street brings us to our next speaker, Denise Sutton, who's a business historian and associate professor in the Department of Business at City Tech. She's the author of Globalizing Ideal Beauty, Women Advertising and the Power of Marketing, and she's going to be speaking about a fixture along Fulton Street, the store and founder, the store Lane Bryant and its founder. We're fortunate to have a colleague from another university nearby, Tessa Mafucci, and she's the assistant chair of the Pratt Fashion Department and an adjunct assistant professor at Pratt Institute. Her research focuses on the intersection of fashion and labor, with an emphasis on sustainability, technology, and material culture. We will close out the presentations with Rick Davey, who's the founder and director of Brooklyn Style Foundation and the creative director and producer of Fashion Week Brooklyn, which is coming up soon, and which we told him we certainly hope he plugs and gives us a lot of information about where it will be. The way we will work this is you'll see the functions at the bottom of your screen. You could use the chat to say hello to people, or maybe at times give different information. Somebody mentioned something, you might have a website or some such thing. And then there is a Q&A, and we'll do the Q&A at the end of the presentations. So what you can do is enter your questions as you think of them as the speaker is talking, and then when all the presentations are finished, we should have a good amount of time for Q&A. We are being recorded, so you should know that. And we have started using the feature, the closed caption feature. You'll notice that at the bottom of the screen. We are making use of that. And I guess that is it. So without further ado, it is, oh, there is one more thing that I'd like to say at the beginning because I don't want to be rushed at the end. This is the only thing that makes these events possible is the very hard work of my colleagues and project directors, uh, Celia Castellan and Ariel Lawson. And this will be Celia's final event for us. She is moving on to bigger and better things. And I'm sure that we will see her attending these events, but she will be at the other end. And she has been with us for 4 years and change, and she has been great. And we will miss her and wish her well. So thank you, Celia, for all that you have done in making BWRC more better. And we have more than 100 people registered for this event. And so that is the work that you and your colleague Ariel have been doing. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Winnette Clyde to speak.
Good morning, everybody. Once I begin sharing my slides, I will stop sharing myself so you don't do that distracting thing where you see me watching myself in the corner. But good morning, and thank you to BWRC for the invitation to participate in this event. I'm really excited to hear my fellow panelists' presentations. Let me start to share. So, believe it or not, this is Fulton Street, Brooklyn. This building here on the left side is where Macy's now stands. Formerly on Fulton Street, there was this elevated train. Right in the background, you can see Brooklyn Heights, much of which remains that way to this day, which is pretty interesting when you look at older photographs of the city. You expect to see much more difference, but Brooklyn is an old town, and a lot of that grandeur remains. So here's the opposite view of that photo. You can see Borough Hall and the courthouse. This is Adams Street, where the train turned on to Fulton. New York has always been a fashionable place to be, and wealth displayed through appearance is as commonplace today as it was in the 19th century. I first learned about this in a sort of unconventional way during coursework at the Graduate Center, but not in a course related to fashion. It was about antiquity in New York. And in learning about that, you learn the role of importing dress, style, fashion, about the birth of the retail industry and how it became, intrinsically tied to early life in New York, at least for me, in a way that it hadn't been before. Much of the discussion as it regarded fashion and textiles and the habits of shoppers dealt solely with those dwelling in and buying in Manhattan. But Brooklyn in the 19th century was as scrappy and striving and crowded and fashionable as it remains today. In those days, it was still an independent city whose downtown area was about to begin a period of transformation that would change the landscape of Brooklyn as it was then known and make it a contender in the fashion stakes as well. The beginning of this was really with the advent of ferry service to Brooklyn Heights, to the Brooklyn Heights waterfront, which was primarily farmland in that time, with a few dwellings dotted, amongst that landscape. But with the increased ability to travel came the construction of homes, making Brooklyn Heights the world's first suburb, right? The first commuter town. Those homes were built for that moment's burgeoning titans of industry who commuted to work into Manhattan and the wealthy and elite of growing Brooklyn. And as a result, nearby Fulton Street began to emerge as a center of commerce, with many of its businesses focusing on outfitting Brooklynites in style. So I think lots of department store history has been covered. Again, more so as it pertains to Manhattan, and which had a greater influx of shopping and shopping related businesses, but downtown Brooklyn had held its own, even from those original times. When you look at the construction of the train, right? As we all know, as current commuters, the addition of easy access to a location will always increase business to that location. So the Elm Street stop on the Fulton Street L was a prime way for commuters to reach the Fulton Street area, both to work and to shop, right? And so the ferry service brought people in through Brooklyn Heights, but increased access via the train really made the textile industry and the fashion industry boom in Brooklyn. And for me, the beginning of this research, like all research, and maybe this is just my librarian brain and how it works, you get into keywords and searching and trying to figure out, who was where and how were they placed in Brooklyn at that time. And one of the more interesting things I came across was this article from the Met called Near Neighbors, which talked about some 1990s, maybe it was early 2000s, exhibits that featured Brooklyn fashions, right? So a lot of Brooklyn Museum's collection is actually housed in the Costume Institute at the Met because of a lack of space. So in the process of transferring some of those items, the Met wrote this article discussing two designers, Herbert Louet and Alice Bergen Cody, whose work they had in their collection. You can see an example of some of that on the screen here. And interestingly, the label of 17 Elm Place, Brooklyn, which was H. Louis' where his atelier was located. For me, one of the things that jumped out, not just the interest in learning about this couture created right here in our city, but again, that distinction between the elevation of a male dressmaker. Herbert Louet was in a lot of ways a contemporary to Charles Worth. He may have relied on that to bolster his reputation. Certainly he needed to convince women to use a male dressmaker. And so a lot of that cachet around being dressed by a man was still present even in that time, while Alice Bergen Cody was thought of more as a dressmaker, right? Like the difference between being hailed as a tailor and a couturier versus a dressmaker. Oftentimes women who rely on what is viewed as domestic skills, cooking, fashion, their work is sort of downplayed versus when men enter those same spheres. And that was certainly present in the relationship between these two. There were a lot of parallels in their career. They both had workrooms in downtown Brooklyn. They both expanded into importing their own fabrics and textiles and trims and offering sort of a full service studio when they saw the competition of department stores and the need to, and just the change of fashion and the way that people wanted to shop. They rolled with those times. Alice Cody she went from J Street to Fulton Street to 23 Elm Street, just down a few doors down from Louet's place. And then when downtown Brooklyn began to shift once again, all of us historians and academics love looking at maps, so we know a lot of those storefronts were condensed into larger plots of land, particularly the block where Macy's is located. As they were sort of bought out and shifted along, both Louet and Cody ended up in Fort Greene, again on roughly the same street, working out of the parlor floor of their homes. So even as Brooklyn continued to make strides and continue to become this fashion center, that work continued to spread out, and the influence of fashion continued to boom throughout Brooklyn, even as far back as late 19th century, early 20th century. To that end, one of the primary ways that we do research and we can learn about a time, right? Two things: the census and newspaper ads. So as you can see a sampling of things here, And again, an interesting thing began to happen when searching the Brooklyn Daily Eagle's archives. You could readily find Mr. Louet's name in ads, and this rather interesting story here about when he moved into Fort Greene and a thief stole 9 rolls of silk worth $500 from this place. We can see the value of textiles and fabrics even then, right? Like the theft of this material was newsworthy enough to end up in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. We can see just a sampling of locations in Brooklyn and the concentration of those businesses on Fulton Street and Livingston Street and what have you. Just the endless requests for dressmakers, right? Dressmakers and tailors, and the advertisement of teaching these skills, because that also became a business and a commodity in itself. The handing down of these skills in an informal way through apprenticeships, which we learn a lot more about with certain high profile businesses or the standout businesses, but it was also everyday practice, as evidenced by the sheer number of ads. Ad space wasn't cheap at that time, and so you can see here, Macy's had full page ads advertising sales and fabric and services. You can see other Fulton Street locations that really relied on the newspaper to communicate the goings on of Fulton Street as it was beginning to change. And this, I particularly enjoyed this little excerpt from the Brooklyn Daily Eagle in 1896 about women in dress, right? It's a little bit snarky, right? This idea that women caring about their appearance is sort of comical and a thing to be put down, but it was always there. Everyone communicates through their appearance. Everyone has a desire to look well, and everyone wants to display their wealth, through their appearance. So I love this connection to, advertisement and skill building and entrepreneurial spirit and the go-get-itness of young women at this time who would seek out training and who would seek out, additional ways to earn money and a way to live their life. Even at this time, all of this was happening in downtown Brooklyn. All of this continues to this day. And as the times changed, Brooklyn changed, and we saw new business opportunities and new energy and new innovations to roll with those times, which we'll hear, a bit more about from Denise. The preparation for today just is a tiny, this is a brief entry into what Fulton Street was all about, and just a handful of resources generated so much energy and so much further need for further study, so I'm excited to see how this can be built upon and what other treasures can be discovered in the abundant archives that we have available here in Brooklyn. And it's a matter, it's fun, right? We engage in a search, which search terms, which search engines, which collections, which archives, which libraries will feed this new avenue of inquiry and reveal more about a place that we all walk through and explore, every day. So it'd be interesting to see how this research avenue develops and how the interconnectedness with other research being done in that area can fill in some of the gaps that we have about Brooklyn specifically, because we do know a lot about fashion in New York City generally.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Winnette.
Thank you.
That is, I love your pitch for doing archival research, that there are whole areas that need to be looked at, and you've shown us a way to do that. And we're now going to continue with this historical perspective before we come up to date, and then even looking on the future as we talk about fashioning in Brooklyn. And so now Denise Sutton will also give us a historical viewpoint or view. Okay, Denise. Thank you, Winnette.
Yes, that was so interesting. That was great. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for that introduction, Richard, and for inviting me to be on the panel this morning. I'm very excited to be here, and especially in such good company. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Okay. So as a business historian, I focus exclusively on the creative industries. And this includes businesses like advertising and marketing, fashion, beauty, publishing, and film, among other businesses. The business history of Lane Bryant provides interesting insights into American culture and business. And for today's presentation, I'll focus on Lane Bryant's innovations and talk about the brand history in downtown Brooklyn. Lena Himmelstein is the founder of the plus-size women's apparel brand Lane Bryant. She emigrated to the United States from Lithuania when she was just 16 years old in 1895. Like many immigrants, Himmelstein earned wages by taking in sewing. And in 1904, just 9 years after arriving in New York City, she was able to start her own small shop on 120th Street and Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. And this is where she began to make apparel for pregnant women who were asking her specifically for comfortable and stylish ready-to-wear maternity apparel. So yes, Lane Bryant actually started with maternity wear. Himmelstein recognized and met the demands of the pregnant and eventually the plus-size consumer. She was a pioneer in marketing and advertising, innovative work practices, and garment production practices, and she was an early adopter of mail order merchandising through her catalogs. The mass production of maternity apparel in the early 20th century certainly marked a shift in ideas about pregnant women. The Victorian era notion of pregnancy was that pregnant women should stay at home until they gave birth. Of course, not all women could afford to stay home or wanted to stay home during pregnancy, and this was really Lane Bryant's target market. You can also see in this ad that, and this was pretty much across the board, that any illustration or image of maternity wear didn't really show a pregnant woman. Even though ideas about pregnancy at this time were slowly changing around the turn of the century, Lane Bryant had a hard time getting their ads into newspapers because of those lingering Victorian notions about pregnancy. The story is, from a number of secondary sources that I've come across, is that in 1911, the New York Herald was finally convinced to run an ad for Lane Bryant's maternity wear, and by the next day, their entire inventory was sold out. But what I discovered more recently, as I started to do some research on Lane Bryant in Brooklyn, is that the Brooklyn Eagle was also taking ads from Lane Bryant maternity wear as early as 1911, as you can see by the ad here. So that was an interesting discovery and a missing part of the history. And this also points to Winnette's point about the importance of newspapers, both to research and to advertising at this time. So at around the same time Lane Bryant was advertising in newspapers, the company started to produce a mail order catalog to send directly to customers. Sales of maternity wear really skyrocketed, perhaps in part because it was so convenient to order from a catalog but also because it may have been more comfortable ordering maternity wear from the privacy of one's own home. After the success of Lane Bryant maternity wear, Himmelstein turned her attention to the plus size market, or as you can see here, the stout market. In an early example of market research, Himmelstein and her staff measured some 4,500 customers in the store to identify the various types of plus size figures. So Lane Bryant was doing market research before businesses were even calling it that. Of course, the women who fell into the target market for Lane Bryant clothing had money to spend, and they wanted fashionable clothing that fit well. And they also wanted the upscale shopping experience, which they weren't exactly getting at the regular department stores that weren't really catering to the plus size customer at the time. So Lane Bryant gave these women exactly what they wanted in a shopping experience. And because of all the marketing research she did, she really understood sizing and body types, which put her far ahead of the few competitors in the plus size apparel market at the time. So in fashion, taking a pattern from a size 14 to a size 16, for example, is called grading. And grading a design up to a larger size means more than just adding inches around the edges of the pattern, because there are quite a few different body types within larger sizes. Lane Bryant had their own special technique for grading, and it really made a huge difference in the fit of the garment. By the early 1920s, the plus size business at Lane Bryant surpassed maternity wear, accounting for more than half of the annual $5 million in sales. And in today's numbers, that's about 78 million. So Himmelstein and her team were busy expanding the brand in the 1920s, and they were working on opening stores in new locations. They were running ads in at least the Brooklyn Eagle by as early as 1911. So clearly Brooklyn was already on their radar. And downtown Brooklyn's popular shopping district along Fulton Street between Flatbush and Court attracted Lane Bryant's attention. And in addition to stores, theaters, restaurants, and public venues were scattered along Fulton and the streets behind it on both sides. It really made sense for Lane Bryant to open a store in this location. So Lane Bryant bought a plot of land that faced on both Livingston Street and Hanover Place, a one-block side street between Fulton and Livingston, only about a block away from Flatbush. They built a 3-story building with the main entrance on Hanover. This building was made of reinforced concrete and had banks of large display windows stretching across the street facing sides of all 3 floors. And you can see the illustration from this ad in the Brooklyn Eagle here. It was large enough to take up about half of the block. The store carried both the maternity lines and the plus size lines. And as with maternity, Lane Bryant offered large sizes in everything: day and evening wear, casual and work, outerwear, as well as undergarments. The store also carried an exclusive line of shoes, hats, and jewelry, specially sized and proportioned for plus size. And on top of that, Lane Bryant also had a beauty salon on the premises. It was a one-stop shopping paradise. This new Brooklyn store opened on October 9th, 1922. And I just want to read some of the small print from this Brooklyn Eagle ad. Quote, "The Lane Bryant Institution is the development of an idea, but no idea develops into an institution unless it is an original idea. The Lane Bryant idea was to emancipate the woman of large figure from the dressmaker and the tailor to make it possible for her to select ready-wear apparel that fits her properly and reflects the latest Parisian fashions," end quote. So this ad celebrates Lane Bryant bringing Fifth Avenue and Parisian fashion to Brooklyn, even though Brooklyn already had a Fifth Avenue, but we get what they're saying here. By the beginning of the 1950s, the Lane Bryant store in Hanover had outgrown its space. The company was looking for a new location in Brooklyn, which was actually one of their most profitable stores. The new site they chose was the old Balch Price Furrier's building at the corner of Fulton and Smith. And once the deal for the new site was made, Lane Bryant moved up Fulton Street into one of the most visible locations in the shopping district. And the grand opening of this store took place on November 20th, 1950. The main floor of this new store had sportswear, accessories, lingerie, shoes, and the tall shop, which had more of the same for tall women. And growing up, we always had the Lane Bryant catalogs in our house because my mom shopped their tall women clothing. The second floor had dresses, coats, foundation garments, the fur department, and what Lane Bryant was calling by this time the shop for chubby girls and chubby teens. And they also had a maternity shop. The third floor held the popular sale floor with discount items from all of their lines, as well as the hat shop. And up on the fourth floor were offices, stock rooms, and the Albert Carter Beauty Salon. The new air-conditioned store had elegant chandeliers, teak flooring, fine carpeting, new elevators, and triple the floor space of the old store. Lane Bryant's grand opening at this location was pretty spectacular, as described by the Brooklyn Eagle. The sidewalk around the store was covered with gold paint for the occasion, and Lena Himmelstein cut the ribbon to open the new store and was joined with a number of company executives, the Brooklyn Borough President Cashmore, and the opera singer, Helen Jepsen, who was often a spokesperson and a model for Lane Bryant. Just 4 years later, Lane Bryant celebrated its 50th anniversary. And this special anniversary inspired a collaboration between Lane Bryant and Charles James, an American designer. He designed a line of maternity wear for the store for their use exclusively. This was one of the first examples of a designer doing this type of collaboration, and the successful outcome would lead to many more designer collaborations at Lane Bryant. This is just another great example of the company's innovative approach to business, and because this is something that we really see throughout the fashion industry now, this type of collaboration. What you see here is the Lane Bryant location at Fulton and Smith up until December 2019. Unfortunately, Lane Bryant's Fulton and Smith Street location closed on December 17, 2019, after 97 years of serving downtown Brooklyn shoppers. I really wasn't aware of this until just a few weeks ago, because I really hadn't been in this area since the pandemic. So I was actually really surprised to learn this about this location. The Lane Bryant business remained in the family until it was acquired in 1982 by the Limited Corporation. And as you can see here, the company went through a number of acquisitions and was recently sold to Sycamore Partners in 2020. One question that I've really been grappling with in my own research, not just on Lane Bryant, but on other family-run or smaller companies that are acquired by large corporations, is what happens to innovation once that company is acquired? With a huge conglomerate like Ascena, a company that owned many different apparel brands along with Lane Bryant, were they really making the most of Lane Bryant's strengths? But this is a part of a trend in the fashion industry large corporations or private equity firms buying smaller or mid-size brands. And unfortunately, what I think is often lost in these acquisitions is the kind of innovation that we see under Himmelstein's leadership and the careful building of a brand that really understands and values its customers and its employees. Today, the plus size apparel segment of fashion has more potential than ever. Currently, 67% of women in America wear a size 14 or higher. The plus size market has a value of $24 billion in the United States, with a potential annual growth of 4%, which is nearly double the rate of the overall apparel market in the United States. Despite those figures, though, Lane Bryant on Fulton closed, leaving just one Lane Bryant store in Brooklyn, which is at the Gateway Shopping Center in East New York. So I think the closing of Lane Bryant at Fulton may also point to rising costs of retail space in downtown Brooklyn, as Brooklyn sees more development in residential and in retail. So with this new development, perhaps a new demographic. Still, Lane Bryant was a presence in downtown Brooklyn from 1922 until 2019. That's 97 years of serving the plus size customer in that area. And that's quite an achievement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Denise. That was quite illuminating, and you give a span, a 20th century span, and we see that COVID killed something else valuable to us, as well as all the other havoc that it has wreaked on the planet since 2020. And so I was struck at the beginning when you were talking about, the reticence of pregnancy and women showing themselves during their pregnancy, the confinement, I think it was called, in the 19th century novels. And then we have Demi Moore in whatever that was, 20 or 1990, or Rihanna now. And so things have changed that way. But I think that you have really given a very good span of history. And with Winnette's talk and your talk, we see fashion from different perspectives, not only historical, but also the people who use it, the people who do it, the people who produce it. And I think it is a really good balance that you and Winnette have done. So thank you very much. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tessa Mafucci, who's going to continue this discussion. Tessa.
Thank you, Richard. I am so delighted to be here and join this panel and get to virtually visit City Tech, and just learned so much from both Winnette and Denise's presentations, and it feels like the perfect segue, because what I'll be talking about is what's happening currently along the waterfront from a fashion perspective. And really, in a lot of ways, what both Winnette and Denise shared, it's amazing how much things stay the same. It's the same challenges of, the real estate space and the innovation and the kind of reaching your customer. So I will go ahead and share my screen and then give sort of a brief overview of what's happening on the waterfront currently. So as a little bit of context on my work, I do look at the Brooklyn waterfront, but my research actually started in the garment district and sort of expanded from there. And so the work that I'm currently doing is based in this digital humanities approach of mapping, both geographically, as Winnette mentioned, us historians love maps, but also network mapping. and trying to understand how all of these, hundreds, even thousands actually, of fashion enterprises are interrelated and connected to one another today. And so what you're seeing here on the left is a heat map showing the density of fashion production in New York City currently. And so these clusters here is the garment district. It's definitely the densest and sort of the biggest in some ways. But then you also see the adjacency that Long Island City, just across the water, is sort of the next big cluster just because of that proximity to the garment district. But what I'll be talking about today is this clustering along the waterfront here in Brooklyn, starting with the Army Terminal furthest south, and then Industry City a bit further north. There's some clustering in here as well, and then the Navy Yard right here along the waterfront. And so this is what I've been really interested in, and kind of following on what Denise was saying as well about when Lane Bryant was purchased, that do these conglomerates really foster innovation? What's very unique about New York's fashion landscape is that these are all small enterprises. So the innovation is really front and center, and these interrelationships and sharing creative knowledge is what makes New York's fashion ecosystem so fascinating. So I've been tasked with sort of giving this a brief overview. I'll try to be quick, of these kind of spaces along the waterfront. So I'm starting in the furthest south at the Brooklyn Army Terminal. And this was constructed for World War I initially, although it wasn't actually completed until World War I was over. But then it was purchased by the New York City government and listed on the Register of Historic Places. And then in the 1980s began to be renovated for industrial use. And so you can see, I mean, this building is a Cass Gilbert, the architect Cass Gilbert. So it has this real kind of grandeur to it. I love this atrium here. But today, I mean, you can see it's still the same structure. It's still the same space. And the Army Terminal is unique along the waterfront in that it has a very sort of like the bones of the fashion work is happening. So there are brands that have warehousing down there where they're doing distribution, brands like Lafayette 148. And then there are also companies that serve the fashion industry in a variety of ways. So companies like Siegel and Stockman, who do dress forms, Annex, who does mannequins. So they have their warehousing, but also small showrooms in the Army Terminal. And then there's also, again, these like real, like sort of workhorses of fashion production. So folks like the National Bias Binding Corporation and National Textile Industries, FABSCRAP, which does both embroidery and screen printing. And so these are spaces that, you know, maybe aren't as much of sort of the glamour of fashion, but it's really where the work gets done. And the Army Terminal is a central location where that's happening today, where there's space compared to the garment district where space is at such a premium. There's also in the Army Terminal some really interesting innovation spaces as well. So there's Makerspace, which has a variety of workshop spaces, including woodwork, you know, and kind of CNC machining and things like that, but also a whole garment setup. So sewing machines, this digital embroidery machine, and a variety of kind of other places where designers can prototype and work from. And then another really innovative business down in the Army Terminal is Algae Knit, and they're creating yarns from kelp, from sea kelp. So looking at how biodegradable yarn can be created. And then one of the big players down in the Army Terminal is Fab Scrap, and they've been there for a number of years. And they are a textile take-back program. So they work with all of the fashion brands who are predominantly in Manhattan and then pick up their excess, what would be wastage fabric sent to landfill, bring it back to the warehouse, sort, categorize, and either resell it or recycle it, often downcycling it into what's called shoddy, which is this sort of scrap fluffy, torn up fabric material that's used for things like carpet pads or insulation in car doors, things like that. And I have a couple images. These are my students, pre-COVID visiting FABSCRAP to support the sorting process. FABSCRAP actually runs their entire program because they're a nonprofit with volunteers helping and coming in and going through these. You can see this pile of bags of fabric that are coming in from fashion companies, and the volunteers then sort the fabric by type, decide what could be kind of saved, what needs to be recycled. And in exchange for that volunteer time, you actually get, I think it's 5 pounds of free fabric. So a lot of our students at Pratt use this, almost exclusively for their studio work, because it's very affordable. And also then you're not kind of adding to the fashion waste problem. So moving up the waterfront a little bit, Industry City, or what was originally known as Bush Terminal, is that next kind of hub on the waterfront, moving, south to north. So Industry City's construction actually started a little bit earlier, but similarly, it was used during both World War I and World War II for military purposes. But as the nature of production changed in New York City, it was no longer really necessary as this working port, so the ports were filled in. And again, the space was converted into industrial use. And by the 1980s, actually, Industry City was already the most concentrated place where garment manufacturing was happening outside of the garment district. And again, this is just because of the premium of space in Manhattan. And so there already had been this legacy of fashion production in Industry City. In the mid 2000s, a variety of different development firms acquired this space. So what's unique and worth noting is different about Industry City compared to the Army Terminal is that Industry City is privately managed, whereas the Army Terminal is owned by the city, sort of managed through these nonprofit structures. So that does really change kind of how the redevelopment happened in this particular waterfront region. So Industry City is much more of a kind of consumer playground than a true industrial space in a lot of ways. So this is, one kind of view between those buildings that we saw from the aerial photo. And they've really been converted into these sort of workplace spaces. And so what you see from a fashion perspective happening in Industry City is that these brands, names that we probably recognize like Gap and Moda Operandi and Rag & Bone and Pyre Moss, are using these spaces for content creation. So they're doing photo shoots and video shoots and more of kind of the marketing side of the fashion work. And there's also a lot of retail space in Industry City. So we have brands, vintage shops, Ashia Accessories has a storefront there. And so again, it's really this much more kind of consumer focused space in Industry City compared to actual like industrial production. But that said, there is some industrial work happening in the space. So Pana Project is one that does sampling. And they do sampling for a lot of the, sort of big name runway brands. And so there is, some industrial setup there. There's also Tailored Industry, which is a 3D knit production space. So they're working with Shimaseki machines that do whole garment 3D knitting. And on the right here, you can see kind of what that programming looks like to build a knit in the CAD software. And then the other thing that's happening in the Industry City space that's really exciting and is actually kind of technically in what's now known as Bush Terminal. The spaces kind of were one campus and now are a little bit subdivided, but Slow Factory, which is an incredible nonprofit doing work in climate justice and social equity around fashion, is actually building their Slow Factory Institute in the Bush Terminal building. So this is underway, and it's a really exciting project around open education and innovation and material science in particular. And I highly encourage everyone to go kind of look them up and see how you can support their work and get involved in it, because it's a really exciting piece of what's happening on the waterfront from an innovation perspective. So then just to kind of move us to the northmost part of that Brooklyn waterfront, the Brooklyn Navy Yard is our kind of final hub where fashion is happening. The Navy Yard was the earliest to start to be developed. Although it was decommissioned in the 60s, the real industrial redevelopment didn't really start to happen until the 90s and early 2000s. And it's also on the Register of Historic Places. And again, it's also owned by the city. So compared to Industry City, the Navy Yard has this nonprofit management structure that sort of shapes a bit of how the space is managed. And this is just the aerial view. You can see that it's such a large campus compared to the other spaces. It's definitely kind of the biggest and most complex. And there are a lot of fashion uses happening in the Army Terminal, I'm sorry, in the Navy Yard right now. Lafayette 148, which I mentioned has space in the Army Terminal, also has its headquarters, more of its public facing office space in the Navy Yard. So there's, again, real connection amongst these spaces along the waterfront. They're not acting in isolation. They're actually really working in tandem, kind of based on the specialties of those particular areas. So Lafayette 148 has space in the Navy Yard. So does Catbird, which is a jewelry brand based in Brooklyn. They have both their headquarters and also their studio space where they're actually making their pieces. And then also Storytellers and Creators, which is an incredible production studio space. So they do, again, all of this type of sampling and production run for fashion brands across the city. And then there's also a newer addition to the Navy Yard, which is Decode, and they're a zero waste manufacturing brand. So their focus, again, and this speaks to the kind of innovation point that's happening all along the waterfront, is that there's this real focus and not just kind of doing manufacturing as manufacturing has been done, but actually having these really innovative new ways of working and kind of reimagining what urban manufacturing for fashion can look like. So just to close, these are a few of the other brands that are also in the Navy Yard, just a sampling. But really across the whole waterfront area, there is this small independent fashion production that kind of runs the gamut from folks doing kind of recycling and material focused fashion work to pure design, to the aesthetic labor of fashion. And then of course, fashion shows happen in all these spaces as well. So I'll stop there. I think that's I hope a kind of good comprehensive or at least cursory overview of the waterfront landscape.
Thank you very much, Tessa. That was perfect. It's like going into a restaurant and just tasting that little piece here, a little piece there. And now we want to see the whole menu and just dive in. Thank you very much. What I'm finding today, before we go to our last speaker, Rick, I just want to comment that BWRC, usually we talk about areas that people know about or some people don't know about. I usually learn tons of things. That's what makes this so much fun for me to continue doing. And certainly today I'm learning tons, but we learn like what's going on, what's in a particular location, what is the community's reaction to all these different developments. But I think today there's something else that's also occurred, and that's because of the academic possibilities that have been opened up today. I think, there are a million, as some of the chat, some of the comments in the chat are going, there are a lot of academic possibilities, both for courses and for research. And so I am fascinated with that. There's one more thing someone wrote in the chat, perhaps during the Q&A, we can have someone speak about what's the difference. It's always a little fuzzy in my mind between Bush Terminal, Industry City, Slow Factory being at Bush Terminal. What does that mean as opposed to Industry City? But maybe you could clarify that during the Q&A. And so now we're going to be, we've looked at a sort of academic look at fashion along the Brooklyn waterfront. And now we're going to look at, again, innovation has been a word we're mentioning. And here is someone who's promoting fashion, promoting designers, promoting young designers, promoting people in Brooklyn, and also promoting innovation. So I have the pleasure of introducing Rick Davey.
Thank you so very much. This is so interesting to me, and I don't have a presentation set up. I'm just going to speak a little bit about what we've been doing and what we started, how it was impacted by the waterfront of Brooklyn. And it's so interesting to see the history of the waterfront in Brooklyn and to know that we are now part of it. We are Fashion Week Brooklyn and BK Style. I actually started this in 2004, and the reason was because I thought that Brooklyn had amazing creative talent in the fashion design world, but it was just not recognized, and they all work out of these amazing warehouse spaces in and around Brooklyn, and I thought that Brooklyn needed to have its own fashion week, and so I took the opportunity to create such a platform. It's interesting to me how the waterfront impacted so much of fashion history in Brooklyn, and it's still continuing to do so. So I am glad to be part of this conversation. For us, it started out with us in the waterfront when we did our first show. It was actually in Dumbo on the waterfront it was called then the Tobacco Warehouse. I think it was close to the St. Anne's warehouse where they did a lot of theater and plays and music. And now I think it's part of St. Anne's. Also has now moved their building over to the Tobacco Warehouse, which is close to where they have the carousel. It's an amazing feat that two trees, I think, now own most of the property in Dumbo that has put together. But we were happy to be there. There were a huge tent in an empty, uncovered building. A brick building was really amazing. I think they mostly had weddings there, as far as I knew. And we were really happy to bring the first Fashion Week in Brooklyn and have it there at the Tobacco Warehouse. So that was our first part of being on the waterfront. And we did our show there for at least 2 or 3 years. Most people say that no fashion people is going to come to Brooklyn. Why are you going to do Fashion Week in Brooklyn? And I always had this idea that Brooklyn is going to change and it's going to be very dynamic as a fashion borough. And here we are now. Most of the garment district, as Tessa and Denise and Winnette has spoke on before, now it's all in Brooklyn. Most of the waterfronts are in Brooklyn, and those amazing buildings is now being turned into part of the fashion district. So we are happy to be part of that history. We then move on our show because we never really had a home. We thought we'd have a home like New York Fashion Week did at the Bryant Park. We thought Dumbo would be our perfect home at the Tobacco Warehouse. Unfortunately, that didn't happen because Brooklyn started to change rapidly, and everything started to get quite expensive, and we couldn't afford to be in the Tobacco Warehouse anymore. We had the fortunate opportunity to work again on the waterfront with a new company when Williamsburg was starting up, and it was just starting to pick up in Williamsburg, where everyone wanted to be part of the Williamsburg community. And the Northside Piers developers decided that they were going to open the first high-rise on the waterfront in Williamsburg, and they invited us to be part of what they were doing. And we did our first show in Williamsburg at the Northside Piers, first high-rise building on the waterfront in Brooklyn. that was close to the sugar factory that is now changed. It is beautiful now. Everything is changed in Williamsburg. So again, we were part of that waterfront history, the first fashion week in Brooklyn at the Northside Piers. And again, we were always looking for home. We thought Williamsburg was going to be our home, and we had to move again. So full circle, here we are again. And I'm always looking for interesting place to do Fashion Week Brooklyn. And I thought no one wanted to be in Sunset Park, and I was looking for space, and I came upon Industry City. There were 17 buildings, all mostly empty. I spoke to the owners and they were really welcoming. It was much of a different building now compared to what Industry City is. And we were fortunate to have our shows there for 3 or almost, I think, 4 years, twice a year at Industry City. It's nothing like what it is now with Jamestown made those changes, but we were very happy to be there. We felt like it was our home. They were really nice to us, and we were really happy doing our shows there. So there we are again in the waterfront, kind of pioneering that whole Industry City makeover, because I think the owners of the Industry City actually used what we were doing to try to woo Jamestown into coming in and taking over their buildings. And we did it, I think, one time after when Jamestown was there. So it was very interesting for us, and amazing space. We love it. We love Industry City. We think, again, when we first was doing our show there, most people said, oh, it's too far in Brooklyn. No one is going to come to Sunset Park. And we were like, wow, no, why not? People travel everywhere in and around Brooklyn, and Sunset Park is really beautiful. And we thought the waterfront was really beautiful, all those amazing buildings. And knowing the history of that area really kind of made me feel like, great, we need to really have our show here. So we were really happy to be part of that Industry City. And we're excited to see how much it has grown and how many businesses are now in the fashion business has now been in Industry City. So we are now here again, always looking for a home, and found that we could still be in Sunset Park. And so there's a space in Sunset Park. We've been doing our show for the last 2 years. It's called the Sucker Rooftop. It's on 53rd Street. So this season, we're going to be doing our show again at the Sunset Park on the Sucker Rooftop. So for us, it's always been trying to work part of the waterfront in Brooklyn, and we think the waterfront is an amazing place. We always wanted to do our show at the Bush Terminal. We never had the opportunity, because I thought, I don't know how many people have been to the Bush Terminal, but I think it's an amazing piece of property. Like Tessa had a showcase in her presentation. I think outside of the building itself, there's a huge pier that if you go down the building and all the way to the water, there's a huge pier. It's a so amazing pier. It walks all the way out in the water. You can see the Statue of Liberty. So if anyone has the opportunity, I think you should also take that opportunity to check out that pier. Great for us this season, where we are working with Refashion Week. Our season is coming up again, April 2nd to April 9th. And we are starting off with a kickoff with working with Refashion Week, which work with the sanitation department with sustainable fashion, which is really a big part of what we do. We love sustainability. I think since we started out with Fashion Week Brooklyn, that was a whole mission, because most of the designers and brands that we work with came from a sustainable background. They either make their garments at home in small factories, or it was never fast fashion for us. It was always about the small brands that were doing sustainable projects. So we are happy to work with the Refashion Week to kick off our event on April 2nd at the Bush Terminal. And that space is amazing. We do like that space, and we love that FABSCRAP has a space there, and they're a great brand and organization that supports so many of our emerging designers. So we're really happy to be part of that whole program with Refashion Week. So trying to give you guys a whole circle of us coming back. We do Fashion Week Brooklyn twice a year. We used to call it spring, summer, fall, winter to go along with the fashion calendar, but we realized that for most emerging designers, it's not feasible to do a collection fall, winter, spring, summer. So we decided to call our Fashion Weeks Season 1 and Season 2. So that gives the designers an opportunity to actually showcase either spring or fall. They can show spring if it's spring, so that they can sell those garments immediately because they don't have to look for buyers. They can sell right off the rack, off the runway. So that's important for us. So we are coming up April 2nd to the 9th, and we are going to be in Sunset Park on the waterfront. We are going to be at the Brooklyn Children Museum because it's important for us that we give designers who make children clothing and to have the kids on the runway that opportunity. So this year we are very excited to have our children's show at the Brooklyn Museum, the Children Museum, and that will be on April 3rd. We are very much excited to be working also with another iconic building in Brooklyn, which has been supporting us for the last three years. Is the Acumen, and it's 630 Flushing Avenue, is the old Pfizer building. That building is not actually on the waterfront, but it's similar to what Industry City and the Brooklyn Navy Yard is doing. It's housed the Brooklyn Fashion Incubator that was run by the Pratt organization. So I think it's amazing that that building is now part of the whole fashion industry of what is happening in Brooklyn. So we are really happy to be there. We are partnering with Cope NYC. They do an amazing job with presenting fashion and art. So it's a really good collaboration for us. So we're doing our show there on the April 7th, 8th, and 7th and 8th. And we also work with Digital Fashion Week. So on the 3rd, we're gonna have an event that is gonna combine NFT and digital fashion designers at the Acumen building. So we're really excited about that. Yeah, we are really excited about all the good thing that is happening in Brooklyn. We are happy to be part of this whole movement. And we are really looking forward to all of the things that are, the changes that are being made in Brooklyn. I noticed on one of Winnette's presentation, Denise presentation with Lane Bryan, that she said, bring in Fifth Avenue to Brooklyn. And that was kind of one of our, when I started Fashion Week Brooklyn, that was my whole idea. I was always saying, why do we have a Fifth Avenue with all of the luxury brands only in Manhattan? And we have amazing people in Brooklyn who want to shop. Why can't we have a Fifth Avenue in Brooklyn? So it was really nice to see that little headline on Denise's presentation. So I think we still have a ways to go, but we still do need to bring Fifth Avenue into Brooklyn and eventually the entire garment district into Brooklyn. And I think that's the mission. So I hope you guys could join us April 2nd to the 9th at Fashion Week Brooklyn. All of the schedule and everything is going to be up on our website, fashionweekbrooklyn.com. So yes, feel free to reach out to us. And if you have any questions about our Fashion Week, please reach out and we'll be happy to answer. We are always looking for designers. We are a very small organization. We are not run by any big title sponsors. So we are always looking to work with people and collaborate. So please reach out. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you very much, Rick. That gives us a lot to look forward to. It's great to see that there is such a ferment. And I think now that I would like to open it up for questions. Let's see, we have some questions from earlier on. Someone wanted to know, how did Lane Bryant's store get its name? Why was it called Lane Bryant? So I guess, Denise, that is for you. And please, I'm sure there must be other questions, but Denise, how about that one?
Yeah, I'm so glad that someone asked that question because it seems to be a part of the mythology of Lane Bryant and the history of the brand. But evidently what happened was when Lena Himmelstein went into the bank, when she was opening her first store on 120th and 5th, that the banker actually misspelled her name on the account. So instead of Lena, he put Lane. And actually at the time she was married and her last name was Bryant. So that's how Lane Bryant came about. And for whatever reason, she never changed it.
Okay,
Now it has a lot of value, you know, the name has a lot of value. So
there we go. Okay, I want to know, do any of the panelists have questions for each other as what you've heard? Or I saw, you know, in the chat back and forth, there were some ideas bouncing back and forth that, oh, this might make a nice avenue for research, or we could go this way. So,
Particularly with Tessa's presentation, I think when you go to the Graduate Center, the different concentrations in the Mouse department always overlap in your mind, right? So like, I always think of labor when I think of manufacturing, right? And even though that is an obvious connection to some people, I don't think, unless you make things yourself, I think that's why I think of it that way, right? Because I actually make garments. And so the labor aspect of clothing is always at the forefront of my mind. So when we're looking at, you know, hubs of activity, I always wonder who works there, right? You know, who at FABSCRAP, most of their core team is really divided along age lines, right? So you have in more of the admin positions, younger, more recent grads or people more in the know in these different types of initiatives happening in Brooklyn, but their head sorters are all women of color, probably in like their 40s, you know, who really enjoy working there, and they have a respect from the people who run the place that is not really, I think, that commonly thought of in garment district jobs, right? Like a more menial garment district job. So, you know, looking at who does the cutting, you know, for fashion labels, or who does the sewing, very frequently, those are not young fashion students. Those are older women who have years and years and years of experience with sewing fast and accurate, right? So, you know, that always jumps out to me when sort of highlighting all of these places, the disconnect between the advertising of them as like, you know, cool places for new graduates, but the reality is that they don't have the skills, you know, needed to do like that fast production work.
I'd love to just, completely agree and follow up on that, Winnette, because it's so true. When people talk about fashion, it's usually the glamour and the gloss that comes to everyone's mind instead of the highly, highly skilled labor. And I see that Terry Hum just mentioned in the chat about the like up from the waterfront in Sunset Park. There's so many garment shops that are in like little converted spaces. And that's across the city. We have these kind of stratified, I guess, in some ways, kind of fashion systems where we have these very glossy, very visible, very marketing friendly fashion moments. And then we have all of the associated labor that makes that possible. And I think in particular, what you mentioned, Winnette, about kind of who occupies those different roles is really important, because we're facing a complete workforce crisis when it comes to these highly skilled craftspeople who are aging out of the work. So what is going to happen when the person who really is that very accurate, highly talented seamstress decides to retire? We need to fill that gap, and we need to get a younger generation into these jobs and seeing how fashion and labor, you know, are these really interconnected pieces. And I think also to Terry's point in the chat, there's, you know, New York is not free from the labor abuses that happen all around the world. So we have some really excellent fashion jobs that exist, but we also have some really problematic fashion labor issues in the city. And those two things, you know, as long as we've had fashion in New York, we've had that tension between kind of production and consumption and labor rights. And so it's something that needs a lot of attention, frankly.
Now, may I ask a question? I remember when I was growing up, I grew up in Bushwick, and at the end of my block, there was a factory where some of our mothers worked doing sewing and the like. And those were, at that time, I would guess the kind of work that they were doing in those factories was, we might say, low skill, and they were taught, they went to work at that factory, and the person next to them taught them what to do. My question is, both in the places along the Brooklyn waterfront and the places that Harry mentioned, upland, what is the level of skill needed in how garments are made these days? And maybe, Tessa, I guess this might be in your wheelhouse. And the other question is, where are people being taught either, you know, these skills? Are they taught on the factory floor, or are they taught elsewhere, like in schools and high schools? Or so that's just a big, wide question, and anybody can jump in.
Lynette, I see you're off mute. I don't know if you wanted to start, but I can also jump in.
No, I was just unmuted.
Okay, yeah, I mean, my view on sort of the fashion craft education currently is that I think it's making a revival. I see it coming back. I've been seeing it enter curricula in high schools and elementary schools, which is really exciting to me, because I think, you know, we lost kind of that tactility in our primary education through things that had been like home economics or, you know, those types of classes. But I'm seeing it start to filter back. And I think there's amazing educational spaces in New York, like the High School of Fashion Industries, that have that focus. But I think really most of where this type of education is happening is through organizations like Rick's, actually. It's like people becoming aware that this is a bigger industry than just the kind of Fifth Avenue, and getting involved in doing fashion shows, working with small designers, like making. And so I think right now, fashion education is very much like, it is what you make of it. Like, well, I mean, Winnette, you're a maker as well. So it's like that type, that's where I see fashion education happening. And I think then the next step to me is, how do we create pathways so that there's resources for folks to get this education? So for example, like government funding that would actually pay for apprenticeships or pay for true kind of training programs. But I think that's what's needed, because right now it's much more informal, and it takes these kind of like grassroots, you know, individuals and entities who are doing this work in real time.
You know, as you were saying this, it just dawned on me. We had a recent breakfast talk on a brand new library that opened up in Greenpoint. And part of a library's new mission, or expanded mission, and I don't know if it's new, but it's, you know, libraries aren't just where people go and check out books anymore. And so the library in Greenpoint, this new library, has sewing machines, and they have sewing classes. And I just remembered as you were speaking, I said, oh, I should have known that, because we had a breakfast talk and the person spoke about that. And so, yes, there are, I guess, things like that. And Winnette, I know that you make things, and is there and I know that your mother did, and maybe her mother did, and so that was passed down generationally, but are there other ways that you see it being spread?
For sure. Actually, it's funny. My mother is one of 5 girls, and none of them are creative. So it kind of skipped over all of my grandmother's daughters and landed on me. I also have a lot of first cousins. So I am the only one who has as strong an interest in those things as our grandmother did. She learned in high school, as you were saying, Tessa, back when Brooklyn had more trade schools, you had, automotive schools, engineering schools, and equally valued sewing instruction, or domestic arts, at some schools. So I think there is unfortunately a big disconnect between what you learn in a fashion design program. I think most fashion designers do not do their own sewing. That is the thing that people don't, I guess, put a lot of focus on. And it's interesting. I'm not a huge fan of Project Runway because competition shows give me anxiety, but it was interesting when Zach Posen joined, who clearly is extremely talented as a designer, but extremely skilled in technical sewing, right? So to see how he critique garments versus how someone who is like a Michael Kors, who I'm sure back in his day, did sew, but now Michael Kors is not sewing his own, his own garments. He's not fitting his own garments. So, fashion design programs, I think, might attract people who want that like outward glory, right? Or the fun side of fashion, but I don't personally know or at least the people I knew who were enrolled in those programs, they were not learning, quick industrial sewing for speed, right? That you need when you are producing garments. And it's because I make things, I know how hard it is to be accurate, right? If I'm making something for me, it doesn't need to have the accuracy that I'm also not making 5 of that thing, right? Like I'm making the one top for me where it's to fit me. Whereas when you're a production sewist, you might just be sewing pant legs all day, you might be putting waistbands, on something all day. You might be putting shirt collars on all day, and that's not fun, but it is highly a strong skill, I tell my kids all the time, literally everything in the store human hands has touched. You cannot produce garments by machine. You must have human interaction with this. So when you think of that, when you see a rack of identical coats, it's a whole different way of viewing that, right? So I guess more respect for that aspect of the work, right? It's a valued job, it's a needed job, and it should be valued as highly as the person who came up, with the design. And I don't know if that is pushed in schools or if that is thought of, like sometimes when Denise has had me guest lecture for her classes, I always tell the students, learn how to use that knitting machine that Tessa showed. Buy a knitting, I have a knitting machine, learn technical aspects of garment design that can get you a job. You might not end up with your own show, your own runway show, but there are lots and lots and lots of other jobs, that are fun jobs, that are needed jobs in the fashion industry. So that's the cool thing about Rick's program and different, initiatives, Slow Factory and whatever else. I think it's acknowledging the whole garment chain, right? And how much of that used to be fully here in New York, weaving and textile production itself. So, I have a lot of respect for all aspects of sewing, and it makes it hard to shop, right? It makes it hard to pay for really inexpensive things in stores because you know exactly how hard it is to make, this thing that's now like on the sale rack for $9.99, And I think if more people thought about clothing like that, things would be more equitable, in the back end of the fashion industry.
Okay, thank you.
Chime in?
Rick, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'd
Sure.
like to chime in because it's really so important for me. And I think that's one of the main reasons why when I started, I didn't want to just start as a fashion show or fashion week. I really wanted to have a nonprofit behind it because I don't sew, nor do I make anything. I wish I did, but I always admire people who do. And I think it's always such a challenge. And I think some of the challenges that we are facing is really with space, location, because as a designer, you do need some space. You can sew and make stuff out of your little room. And that's why when I started back in the day, it was people had amazing space. They could get a warehouse or empty space. And now all the space is just taken up by real estate for all kind of other stuff. And I think that's important. Another important thing for me that we started was something called Stitch for Success. And I'd like to continue it a little bit more. What that entails is I always try to find sewing machines that people are not using and try to give it to a lot of the young students, because I think, as Winnette just said, a lot of designers don't sew, don't make their own stuff. They actually give it to someone else to make it. Designers are always asking me, do you know anyone who can sew? I need someone to sew something for me. So for me, the mission was in my life, I would love to see everyone have a sewing machine just as much as they have a computer, because that would really help us to change the dynamics when we talk about sustainability, because then you can do your own repair. You have a skill, you have something to do at home in the evening while you're watching TV, you can actually make stuff. So it's really important to me to really see how we could work as a group and to bring more people on board to really see this kind of mission through, because even a lot of the young fashion students who are in the fashion school, they don't have sewing machines. They have to wait until they go to class. There's one school that we actually work with. It's called the William Maxwell High School in East New York. And we've been really trying to help that school out a lot. They have a small sewing program. They hardly have sewing machines. They don't have dress form. Everything is broken down. And I would really like to see that school do very well and turn it into a bigger platform to give these kids more opportunity to actually be able to learn to sew and make their own garments. Which is really another good thing, Richard, that you talked about. The library, I think the library is an amazing place to kind of start off that program. Just as you go and rent a book, it'd be nice to know that you could go and use the sewing machine to probably finish your garment or something. And I'm happy that we are working with the Brooklyn Central Library, because they have created a program called the Brooklyn Fashion Academy. And every year they have maybe a number of people who want to learn how to sew and to make garments. They take about 15 or 20 people, I think it's coming up. We just advertise it on our page, on BK Style page on the Instagram. And they have open for designers. It's open until March 11th, I think. You can apply. So you get to go through this entire program with the Fashion Academy. And then they do a little mini fashion show. And then what we do as Fashion Week Brooklyn, we allow the students to actually complete a fuller collection, and then they could show it on our runway. So we're always looking for partnership like that and collaboration, because I think it's so important, especially for some of the young kids.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think on those inspiring and encouraging words, we will put this session to an end. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank the panelists. This was really great. I think everybody learned a lot today. So this was a really great combination of panelists. I don't know how you do this, but I'd like, if we can, just one more clap for Celia and say, wish her well as she leaves BWRC. And with that, thank you, everybody, and we will see you soon. This has been recorded, and so if you want to use it, soon it will be on our website. And so we have started doing that. You might want to use this in class or share with other people who are not able to make it. And so thank you very much, and we'll see you the next time.
Thank you, Richard.
Bye. Thank you.
guys
Thank
so
you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
much.